Great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mexico and also about Venezuela. Don't everybody run for the doors because I have a dead body in this presentation. So at least that'll make it slightly interesting. The Justice Department of the United States says that the biggest organized crime threat in the United States is the Mexican drug trafficking organizations. Biggest in the United States. 40% of the $1.4 million gangsters on the streets of the United States answer to these groups. This is our struggle. The former president of Mexico just left office on December 1st. Felipe Calderon used his 6 years, basically consumed his 6 years on security policy, confronting these people head on. 60,000 dead in this process. Not a positive number, but the vast majority of those gangsters killing one another on turf battles caused by the splintering brought about by the government's offensive. So, new president, Enrique Peña Nieto, coming from the Institutional Revolutionary Party that ran Mexico for over 70 years unchallenged. And the way they dealt with the narcos, quite frankly, were de facto truces. You keep the cocaine moving through our communities, but don't kill anybody. Keep the bloodletting to a minimum. That's the way he fought. That's the way that party historically has fought that struggle. Peña Nieto during the campaign and his team tried to emphasize that, look, we're not going back to the truces. That's out of the question. But since he's been sworn in, we've seen a pattern of explanations about his strategy that lead me, at least, to doubt where he's headed. He's said that he's looking for a strategy that, by the way, what they said during the campaign was, we're going to move the police into these roles that the military had played, which is very defensible. As you build up the police force, have them take over the policing of the streets, and it's a totally defensible strategy, and it makes some sense. He's since said, we're going to look for a policy that doesn't go after the narco-trafficking organizations, but deals with the violence as it manifests itself on the streets of Mexico. Another statement that he's made recently, that we want a policy that enjoys more public approval. He said to a meeting of all of his outgoing ambassadors and his Mexico's diplomatic corps that Mexico is going to be a country of peace, and that our foreign policy objectives will be trade, education, science, and technology. When you read between the lines, when a guy offers a lot of different strategies, it tells you two things. One, he thinks that you want to hear that he has a strategy, and second, he's not at all committed to whatever that strategy is going to be. So we have to look at the implications. If Mexico lowers its guard, what that will have on our security and the well-being of our citizens. I think the United States, under the last 4 years in particular of the Obama administration, they have not paid attention to this. Literally, the U.S. ambassador was ousted by the previous president because of his meddling in some of the interagency efforts that Calderon was taking to try to fight this war. And the current ambassador there, a very nice man, personal friend of mine, is an economics guy. So I'm very concerned that we do not have a strategy for holding Peña Nieto accountable in this new term. We should be heavily engaged. Frankly, we should be more supportive, both in a material sense but also politically, and Republicans should be more supportive as well, recognizing that Mexico, for the last 6 years, hasn't been fighting Mexico's drug war, they've been fighting our drug war. And what happens, ladies and gentlemen, when they don't? So we have to have a strategy in the first place, be vigorous in our oversight of what Peña Nieto does or does not do, and watch for this drift and then hold him accountable for that. I want to talk a little bit about Venezuela, if that's okay, because it's in all of the headlines. Hugo Chavez has had terminal cancer for about 2 years. He sought treatment in Cuba, primarily because he thought that he could keep his illness secret there. But the one historic achievement of Cuba's mythical revolutionary healthcare program may be that it killed Hugo Chavez. because the priority for the Cubans has been to push him onto the campaign trail to win a new 6-year term. Well, he did, but he couldn't show up at the inauguration yesterday. So the Supreme Court and the Congress that's under Chavez's control said, well, we can postpone the swearing in and he can take the oath of office when he's able. What that does effectively is prevent the constitutional succession to another bad guy who's Chavista, the head of the National Assembly, but he's also the representative of the narco generals, because Venezuela today is a narco state. But he's not a favorite of Havana, which is stage managing this entire succession. Why? Because, well, I'll give you $10 billion reason why. Annually, they get $10 billion in oil and aid from Caracas. They know that the head of the National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, does not trust them because they helped oust him from power years ago. So their favored guy is a man named Nicolas Maduro. He's now the vice president. He was designated by Chavez as vice president a couple of months ago at the tail end of his last term. Well, guess what? He continues as vice president. And he'll be the one that manages the electoral process if it happens. So they're trying to stage manage this succession to ensure that they have ultimate control of that problem. So who is president of Venezuela today? It's the narco trafficker designated by the Constitution? Or is it the ideologue favored by the dictators in Havana? Or is it a dead man in Havana, in a hospital in Havana? Because we have not seen Hugo Chavez for 30 days. Not even a photograph. The Cubans are very good at producing photographs with the guy conveniently reading yesterday's newspaper. They're specialists at this. But they couldn't do that with Hugo Chavez. And you have to wonder, quite frankly, whether the guy's even alive or even conscious. And why, it's sort of an interesting story. You know, frankly, if you took this to your editor, if you were writing a novel on international intrigue, he'd probably sign you up for a drug test, because it's just completely outlandish. But that's what's happening, and why should it matter to us? Well, a couple of reasons. I mentioned the narco state. Venezuela today is a narco state. What do I mean by that? The head of the National Assembly, the former Minister of Defense, the current drug czar, and the head of the Army have all been implicated directly, personally, in narco trafficking by U.S. law enforcement. They've been designated by the Treasury Department or are under investigation by the DEA. Venezuela's oil company, state-run oil company, launders hundreds of millions of dollars in drug money. That's the PDVSA, the same people that we do business with in getting Venezuelan oil. Chapo Guzman is the world's biggest narco trafficker, cocaine trafficker in the world. In 2010, he spent most of that year under the protection of the Venezuelan government in Venezuela running his operations. The last few months of that was on Margarita Island. Guess who else is on Margarita Island? Hezbollah. Hezbollah runs safe houses, fundraising activities, not only there but everywhere else in the region, and they interact. So the narco trafficking threat is extraordinarily important, and then Iran as well. There are 70 Iranian companies, most of which have been designated as involved in Iran's illicit nuclear or ballistic missile program, that operate suspicious industrial facilities in Venezuela. Now, this is something the State Department says doesn't exist. It's all talk from the Iranians. Well, if you get Google Earth, you can see that they exist. You know, a man named Amir Ali Hajazadeh, who is the head of the aerospace commander of Iran, visited these facilities on at least 2 occasions in the last 2 years. Iran has used the state-run oil company, the state banks, the Central Bank of Venezuela to launder about $30 billion through the Venezuelan economy to evade international sanctions. So what can we do about all this? Well, frankly, that's why I'm here in the capital of the United States, because it's going to take Congress to do something about this. We see a bipartisan recognition of this threat, and a bipartisan recognition that the State Department and the national security establishment in our executive branch is ignoring this threat. So in perhaps the only piece of bipartisan legislation that in foreign policy that passed in the last Congress demands a study and a strategy from the executive branch on dealing with Iran's presence in the Western Hemisphere. We're going to provide a lot of the information which we've provided U.S. intelligence and law enforcement. We're going to provide that to the key members of the committees up here so they can ensure that the State Department and the national security agencies address each of these points and not whitewash the problem. You might have read in the Washington Post yesterday, and this explains what we're up against, that the State Department has been exploring in recent months the normalization of relationships with Venezuela. I know for a fact, because I have a lot of friends in there, but their sole objective was let's just trade, let's exchange ambassadors, and let's get the dialogue going again. They didn't care about democracy. They didn't care about, more importantly to us, the Iran presence or the narcotics problem. In fact, Venezuela today is a narco state. If they get their way, that will undercut ongoing U.S. law enforcement investigations against Nicaraguan individuals and agencies and the state-run oil company that are being conducted by the Drug Enforcement Administration and indictments and grand juries that are sitting in the Southern District of New York. And then you're going to end up, this is going to end up on Eric Holder's desk, and he's going to decide between the foreign policy vision of talking with our enemies or indicting them for shoveling cocaine into the United States. Unfortunately, we know how he's going to come down on that. So we need Congress to be remain active on this, be aggressive. I can see potential allies in Bob Menendez, who's going to be very interested about Havana claiming another stretch of territory in the Western Hemisphere. So we have friends on the Democratic side of the aisle that we have to engage in this area to have an effective policy for going forward, confronting these threats.
Roger, thank you. That was super. Do you want to take a question or two, Roger?
Sure, of course.
If you have time.
Hang on. Go ahead. Roger, what do we know about the status of the Iranian missile bases in Venezuela?
Well, it is, Admiral, it's a very good question. We've had very good information about what's going on there. I think some people are kind of speaking out of turn because they're talking about facilities that I believe, frankly, that there are Shahab 3Bs.
Are they operational today?
Yes. Okay. And that are being concealed in Venezuela at one point in a mountainside and now in an underground facility. They moved it after it started to be spoken about publicly, and there may be other even longer range that can reach Tampa.
So they basically accomplished what Russia was trying to do in Cuba.
And they may have already accomplished it. That's right. I think what they're going to do is they're holding it in abeyance. The most chilling thing about this is the Venezuelan military does not know that they have these. It's completely hermetically sealed under Iranian control because no Venezuelan, well, maybe a handful of them, would push a button to attack the United States or any other country with Iranian missiles. But the Iranians will do it in a heartbeat, particularly in a retaliatory strike.
Wow. Anybody else? Christine? Oh, I'm sorry. We'll come back to you, Claire.
Just real fast, one of the things that we also hear about is the possibility of launching missiles from boats, from essentially large tuna trawlers or other very large boats in the vicinity. Is that realistic? And how vulnerable would the refineries, say, in the Gulf area also be?
They're all very vulnerable. These sort of platforms, I think that you can't. And it sounds crazy but if that's the only way crazy people have to deliver a missile or a warhead, then I think that they could easily resort to that. Another interesting thing is we've given photographs to the State Department, to U.S. intelligence of naval mines built by Venezuelans, happens to be a Lebanese-born Venezuelan, in a program funded by Iran. Now, why does a country whose lifeblood depends on oil tankers need naval mines. They purchased the technology, and we told the FBI at the time that there was this officer, a Venezuelan naval officer, was shopping for technology in the United States, real time, and they never were able to intercept him, and he was here purchasing technology for a naval mine program. These are things that just sound outlandish, but when you have photographs of these things, and it just demonstrates how determined our enemies are.
Just on the point that Christine's raised, of course, I'm sure everybody in this room knows, but the particular problem with the so-called scud in a tub option is that you can use it quite effectively for an electromagnetic pulse attack, and it doesn't have the downside for the launching party of having the physical location being one that's identified with you, whether it's in Venezuela or someplace else. That tub can be sunk or simply it'd be unclear whose it was. Claire?
Yeah, really quickly, Ambassador, in terms of a succession battle, if it comes to that between Maduro and Cabello, would either one of those or their backers, is there a difference in terms of the continuity of the relationship with Iran? Is Iran so deeply embedded now in Venezuela that is there any chance of any party in Venezuela now
Right.
turning against them?
Well, in terms of that confrontation, my view is that we should pray for casualties and let them slash each other up and do the sorts of damage that they can do to one another that no outsider can do. I would say that Diosdado Cabello, the narco general, is, it's sort of ironic, he's more vulnerable to the United States because of the law enforcement thing, but he's more pragmatic. I don't know that either one of these guys really shares Chavez's commitment or devotion to the whole international agenda. The Cubans will get their pound of flesh, or 10 billion pounds of flesh, but I think that you might see some tactical moderation from them, but then you're going to have to how do you get the Iranians out? And that becomes the tricky. How do you disengage the Hezbollah presence in the country? The Hezbollah there are half a dozen folks associated with Hezbollah, radical Middle Eastern types that hold senior positions in the Venezuelan cabinet today. So it's going to take a systematic effort to get them out.
Erin?
Yes, I wanted to address the first part of your presentation regarding the cartels here in the United States. I just spent the past month down on the Mexican border to sort of have a good look around, and it's a whole heck of a lot worse than is being reported in the media, as you well know. And your comment was that we should have a policy. But my concern is all we're hearing right now with regards to a policy from this administration is some sort of an amnesty or such. And I'm concerned about how do we have what he's suggesting, Obama's suggesting for a so-called amnesty of some type, and also a DOJ report that says the biggest threat internally to the United States are the drug cartels, and that we have Chapo Guzman who hangs out in Venezuela, and Chapo Guzman is the head of the Sinaloa cartel, which is one of the largest overarching cartels directly south of Arizona. So the southern part of Arizona is under the heel of the Sinaloa cartel, and their primary introductory drug is marijuana, and you have states now legalizing marijuana. So what kind of a policy can we cobble together?
Well, it's going to have to be comprehensive in addressing all of these things, obviously. Border security is the essential obligation of the federal government, obviously, so that has to be part of it. And then you have to have a robust policy of engaging the Mexicans on the anti-drug front, and quite frankly, addressing Hezbollah. When Chairman McCall's subcommittee talked about this, the Hezbollah presence in Mexico, the Mexican embassy went crazy. Well, it's because we haven't, you know, all these brilliant diplomats at the State Department and President Obama, who knows how to talk to all of our foreign friends, can't figure out a way to talk to the Mexicans in a responsible way about the mutual concerns we have about Hezbollah and Mexican territory, then we're just not doing our job on that front either. So I think it has to be you know, essential border security, looking not only at the drug trafficking but terrorists coming across the border, because one of the things that the narco organizations and Hezbollah are doing are exchanging information, tradecraft on getting over the border, smuggling people over, tunneling as well. And so we have to address that in a comprehensive way as well.
I'm sorry, for Republican members, it seems like suddenly they're so afraid of the Hispanic vote. There's the political dimension, and we're not hearing anything about border security. We're now hearing, well, if the Republican Party doesn't reach out more to the Hispanic vote, they're going to wither away. But we can't begin to address amnesty, because for the longest time it was, let's border security first, and then we can start talking about this amnesty thing. Can you get a read right now on how Republican members are thinking about this?
Well, I really can't. But I mean, I think you're right. There's this impression we have to do, you know, somehow that they have to do more on the immigration front. It certainly doesn't have to include you know, any sort of kind of formal amnesty. And I think members can look at in different ways for different solutions. It'd be good to have some kind of positive message on how you deal with all of these people, most of whom are here working and contributing to the economy and who aren't drug traffickers. You know, frankly, the Obama administration has done a pretty aggressive job of deporting people with criminal backgrounds. They've deported more than the Bush administration did on an annual basis. So those sorts of things have to continue in a robust way. We've got to get the amnesty thing, and then speaking as a Republican, we have to get the immigration thing addressed, check that box, but where we're really going to get Hispanic people is the same way we get everyone, and that's talking about our values. And some will agree and some won't, but we need about 45% would be awesome.